You're listening to the Jōrni Podcast. How can our posture affect our physical and mental health every single day? Stay tuned for a fascinating exploration of embodied living. Hi, I'm Petra Brunbauer. What if everything we've been told about holistic health, healing, and well-being is only part of the story? Because thriving in today's world looks different than it used to. Here, we challenge the narratives, rethink what it means to become human, and explore how that shapes the way we lead, live, and step into our full potential. This is the Jōrni Podcast. Welcome to today's episode. It is easy to spend whole days running on autopilot, repeating routines and obligations we created and agreed to, and then never stop to question. We can live this way for years before pausing to ask whether that is even still the life we want. Veronique Ory is an intuitive movement and mindful awareness guide, author of Shine On and Off the Mat, and the founder of the Shine Collective. With a background in theater and over a decade of experience in yoga and holistic wellness, she guides individuals and groups through practices that reconnect the body, calm the nervous system, and cultivate a deeper sense of self-trust. Through private sessions, international retreats, and her online platform, Veronique creates spaces for connection and nourishment in every sense, where movement becomes a pathway to clarity, resilience, and embodied living. Her work bridges the physical, emotional, and spiritual aspects of well-being, supporting people in moving beyond autopilot and into a more intentional, aligned way of life. Let's meet Veronique Ory. Hi, Veronique. It's so great to have you on the podcast today. I've been looking forward to getting to chat with you because we are diving into a topic that I feel a lot of us can relate to, and that is going from autopilot to embodied living. Many of us actually spend some of our whole days on autopilot, just not even thinking about anything, trying to just get through the day and through life. Thanks for joining me today to talk about this, and welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much, Petra. I'm so grateful to be part of this conversation. And it definitely feels so apt now more than ever to really shift away from this default rhythm to design rhythm and really just open up almost the blinders to maybe a certain way of being, to be in a more expansive and open space of how can we actually be in an energetic frequency that feels like, I always say this, equal part grounding and uplift, right? Where we feel regulated, like we know where we are. And also there's an opening to possibility. I really love just to even open up the pathway of what is possible. And once we have that awareness, then we can actually really mindfully shapeshift what that rhythm is for each of us so that we don't ever feel like we're stuck or needing to continue something because we made a commitment sometime in the past and we feel like this almost vigilance to keep that pact with a promise that we made to a former version of ourselves. And so really allowing for grace of being able to have agency to change our minds. And a lot of that is just being really attuned and aware of where we are moment to moment.
Yeah, I actually love how you phrase that, because I do feel that we often don't even check in with ourselves to see what is still working or serving us or what is from the past at some point. That's a really great point of how we sometimes actually live our lives, not even thinking about that. Tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe the parts of your story and your journey that you feel connect to what we're talking about today. And also share with our listeners a little bit about what you do today so they can get to know you.
Yeah, thank you for that prompt. It's so wild. I think so often there's this journey of I think back to my earliest memories, and I always land on the 5-year-old version of me in my grandparents' living room, where these are my Hungarian grandparents that came on a boat with my dad when he was 10 with nothing but the clothes on their back to have this better life. And there are a lot of memories of storytelling, and we would be just in the living room talking. My grandfather had really phenomenal stories, and it was just and that's why I love podcasts. It's like we're just in the storytelling, and it's one of the earliest ways that we gathered as humans, right? When you think of like olden times, we would gather around a fire in a circle, and we would be in the storytelling. And it's one of the greatest ways that we connect as humans, where we can share. And one of the great pillars of connection is certainly really remembering that community. We're meant to be social beings. We're meant to be around chosen community. I even have chills thinking about it because it's so enlivening. And I just had so much fun when I was a kid performing Judy Garland Somewhere Over the Rainbow on the Elvis Presley microphone that my grandfather got me, that he connected to the double tape deck. And he kept those recordings for when I was away so they could listen to it while they're having their bread and coffee in the morning. And I just felt like, oh, like this is what family is. And then as time went on, it has really come to be of like, what does our chosen family want to be, right? So it might be choosing our partner, our mate. Maybe we have children or we have furry children, whatever the dynamic that we're finding. Maybe we're choosing sisters and brothers for ourselves. And so that kind of relationship, it drew me into be in theater. There's such a familiar family aspect of being in theater for anyone listening who has ever been in a play, whether it was that one time in high school or if you went on to pursue this. There's something so tight-knit about everyone coming together to create something together. And I think of that as a really micro way of the macro of how we're actually meant to be creating with one another. And in a lot of ways, those were seeds planted long time ago for what it is that I'm attuning to now as a guide, as a yoga instructor. And yes, that's the umbrella term of how I had my training. And I love assuming shapes with my body. And also, as time goes on, if you've delved into the practice of mindfulness, you realize, oh, there's actually so much depth and different tentacles to go down of this really beautiful sacred practice. And really, it's how do we continue to remember our connection and our oneness? And so in a lot of ways, it's that hearkening back to us around the fire and the circle and the sharing. And so I always remember that in terms of that taking the blinders off of what the autopilot is, because oftentimes the autopilot is when we're in the matrix of these assumed responsibilities and self-made urgencies that we've sort of dug our heels into of, oh, I must do this or I should do this, is really probably the most problematic phrase that we might say to ourselves of all the shoulds, when rather there's a lot to be said for letting go of the shoulds and really just taking that pause from that stimulus to response of what is actually necessary for me, for all of us, right? And so that's probably one of the great alchemizers of shifting away from this like more faster modern lifestyle of how can I actually slow down enough and cultivate that circle of community in these different ways. And so perhaps we go on a yoga retreat in Italy, which why not? Or maybe we discover little pockets of that in our everyday rhythm, which could be in person and it also could be virtually. So we could certainly make use of this technology to be a bridge of connection rather than distraction.
That is so important, what you just shared. And I feel that a lot of people are getting quite upset with technology in that sense that it's disrupting this human connection that we used to have a lot of. Everyone's nose is buried in the phone instead of looking at the person across from them, right? But on the other hand, it's also making possible a lot of the things that wouldn't be accessible for us to be in community with if we didn't have this sort of digital evolution that happened. And it comes, I think, with its own set of mindfulness if you're working with technology. And on the other hand, if you're mentioning retreats, right, and you're mentioning these kind of events, a lot of these are now becoming available online for people that would have otherwise never have been able to interact with that, right? So there are, I feel, new and different challenges to our connections, to our sense of belonging. And part of us coming center to ourselves and realigning with ourselves, I think, is how we manage these new and different challenges to stay in connection with, as you said, our chosen communities, our chosen brothers and sisters that we want to have that connection with. So it's certainly a really interesting and fascinating thing that's happening in the world as we're learning to navigate something that we didn't have to really navigate 20 years ago. So different ways of looking at where do we belong in this? Where do we find our tribe? Where do we find our communities and all of this? And yeah, so important. Now, you work as a yoga instructor. So where do you find that element of the in-person connection coming in to bring ourselves more alignment, to bring healing? I mean, human connection and human touch are some really important things for our health. So do you find that this can all be done virtually? Or are you finding that people need that human connection in person?
Yeah, I think it's yes. And there was definitely that really life-changing moment with COVID for all of us where there was, I think, not to say there were only two groups of people, it did sift a very strong group of people that sort of laid down on the couch and said, okay, just let me know when it's over. And then there was another group of people that saw ingenuity of, okay, with this limitation, with all of this fear messaging, how am I going to operate in a way that actually feels like we can be in relationship with the challenge, not to ignore the severity of it, certainly, but that we have this use of technology in this time is really very fortuitous. When I did my first yoga teacher training, the model was I would then go to all of the studios and offer classes, and maybe down the road I would have private clients, and then maybe down the road I would lead retreats, right? There's a certain model of what one does if you pursue a certain track. And then what was so wild was in October of 2019, I'm a really big advocate for journaling, getting really clear on manifestation, ideas, thoughts, seeds that I want to plant. And when we're very clear, what's so beautiful is time, space collapses and the universe speeds up to meet us where we are. It's like, I almost feel like the plane is circling, like waiting for the runway. And then when you write it down, it's like you create that runway for it all to appear. And I had written down, so at the time I was teaching 17 group classes a week all over town. And so I was very much a human pinball about town. And even though it was 17 60-minute sessions, it ended up being double the amount of hours because of the driving and the time before and after and cleanup and talking to people. And then an additional amount of time to create my music playlists and to design the classes and all of the things. And so I was feeling like, okay, there's a certain ceiling to that. And so I had set out to let go of one group class a month for the year of 2020, so that by the end of the year, I'd be 12 classes lighter. And my maybe fellow type A friends listening might relate to this. I created a very systematic spreadsheet of how I would let go of one class per month. And it was so painstaking. I was just peeling the Band-Aid off at just an impossibly slow pace, which of course, January, painstakingly let go of one, February, another. And then of course, as you're probably guessing, in March, the rest of them fell away. What's so fabulous about these instances where any kind of scarcity thinking, any kind of lack, or this like gripping to, oh my gosh, all of this is known over here. I'd rather just stay in the known column versus over here, which is unknown, which feels just so fear inducing, really anxiety inducing. I happen to connect with private clients who actually don't live near me. They happen to be here at that time. We connected in person twice. And then they went back to where they live and we set up Zoom sessions 5 days a week. And then from that, word of mouth spread. And so I had a full roster of private clients, all virtual, which initially I had this very complicated setup of laptop far away and iPad close to me where I was on my mat and I was showing the shapes as I was also guiding verbally, as I was also looking at the little rectangles on my screen. And very shortly, I thought, this is not a sustainable way to be. And so I just shifted to sitting and verbally cueing. And what is so powerful about this use of technology of not only can I be anywhere in the world, but they can be anywhere in the world. And not only do they not have to be looking at their screen because I'm a disembodied voice in their space. In fact, they could put their phone or their device to the side, cast their eyes to nature. They could be at the beach. They could be on a rooftop. They could be in a park. You know what I mean? There's so many ways that someone can create the practice space that actually feels good to them. Sometimes they're in a random hotel room. One time, one of my clients, their mother was in the hospital and they just did their practice next to the hospital bed. This would be many different instances where ordinarily they would have to cancel because they wouldn't be able to be there in person. So the technology actually allows them to be mobile. And when everything opened back up, I 100% thought everyone would go back to the studios, and none of them did, not a single one. And I really attribute that to because I'm 100% focused on in a one-on-one environment and they feel me there because I'm really presencing myself there, just in the way that I feel like you and I are in the same space, right? The whole world is continuing to buzz and do the things, but this conversation is it. And just in the same way that I'm in session, it's like, this is the only thing that's happening. And so I start each session and I ask, what are you craving? And sometimes that's elusive. Like, what do you mean? So it could be, oh, like I woke up and my hip hurts, or I slept wrong, my neck, or maybe it's they're wrestling with something kind of emotional and some kind of something that they need to talk through. And then they realize that the thing that's happening in their relationship or work or something that feels misaligned in their home, it's actually manifesting physically. And so what ends up happening is the mindfulness of the connection of mind and body and the things that we're actually attuning to the majority of the time, that gets an opportunity to be played out and to metabolize through the physical yoga practice if someone is willing. And what's so phenomenal about the willingness, and like we spoke about, of the awareness of it, is then there's actually permission for it to soften and to release. And that part is just so phenomenal, which a lot of people might say like, oh, that's so nice, but I prefer in-person sessions, or like, I just prefer group classes because it's social. It's so individual. If whatever it is someone is doing, keep doing that. But what I've found is oftentimes if the studio schedule doesn't align with your schedule, or maybe you're going through a season where you have young kids at home, where there's just so many different reasons why maybe going to a place doesn't align even for a season. So it's just a nice way to know, okay, I don't have to be sedentary or not as active, or I don't have to pause on my practice because there isn't just one way to be in practice. And so maybe that's just another way to let go of whatever the default rhythm is of, oh, if it doesn't work in this one particular way, then it's off the table. That's not necessarily the case at all.
Yeah, actually, I do think that COVID taught us in some ways to be more flexible, maybe also to be a little bit more curious about possibilities and finding solutions to things that were challenging. So carrying that forward, I think has actually, as you said, if you let yourself, right? And this is one of the things, if you let yourself be part of that, I think that was carried forward into a lot of us now actually looking for these various possibilities and curiosities in our daily lives. And that I feel was definitely a change from before COVID, where everything just kind of worked one way. This is how it was done, right? And we were all just kind of following along. So with that disruption, I think also came a bit of a different way of thinking. I appreciate you mentioning that because I feel amongst a lot of the negative things that happened, there was some of that came forward as well that maybe changed how we were living on autopilot and actually interrupted that in a sense as well. Now, how do you bring the body into all of this? Because we're talking about the yoga practice, we're talking about coming together at the yoga studio or virtually, but how do we then actually bring our bodies into this more mindful way, into interrupting this life on autopilot and just surviving in a stressful environment, being overwhelmed? And you mentioned the mind-body connection, of course. So how do we bring all of that back into our lives if we feel that we have maybe lost that a little bit or are struggling with that a little bit? From a yoga teacher perspective, how do you bring all that together?
This comes up so often, particularly around posture. So I definitely have a theory, which probably isn't unique, but I reference it a lot because I think it's instructive to think about where fashion was before the 1970s. And if you can think of an archetype of a woman or a man or a child, pretty much all ages, of what that person looks like in 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, traced to the 1970s to you fast forward to today, and you might see a swatch of people at a restaurant or at a gate at an airport, or imagine an airport scene in 1955 versus today, what people are wearing in relation to their posture. You're thinking, why is this yoga instructor talking about this? So the way that we hold ourselves, our carriage, directly affects our mood, right? It is increasingly more available to us to feel uplifted and open and receptive if we have our shoulders back, our spine is erect, we feel our head atop the shoulders, versus if our shoulders are rounded in. The way that we sit, if we're just in loungewear, versus if we've dressed ourselves up in something that we find to be more sophisticated. The way that we walk, if we're just in our slippers versus shoes that are well-made and maybe a little bit elegant. There's so many different ways. And I love highlighting this because there's so much messaging in the spiritual world of like, it has to come from the inside, really get masterful of your inner world. Yes. And there's a lot of being in relationship with how we are exteriorly and how we're carrying ourselves physically that actually then communicates with our inner world as well. So it's so important to think about in terms of our daily rhythm. So I recently had a few days with my parents, who my dad and my stepmom, they live in California, and I don't think they mind me sharing this, but I just, I think it's maybe a little bit embarrassing, but if they're listening, I'm really sorry. And it comes from a place of love. I'm always tasked when I see them to help them with their posture, because gravity and age have a way of bringing the shoulders forward, the head in front of the body. And it's like what I call like archetype of a grandfather or a grandmother. And we have the knowledge and the awareness now that the way that the spine is and the way that we're able to have shoulders, back, head atop the body, it's actually regarded as the fountain of youth. That if we can keep a really nice tall spine, then we're more apt to breathe fully. We're more apt to feel like we have that nervous system regulation than if we're sort of hunched over. And so one of the ways that we can be in mindfulness in the physical practice in the daily rhythm is to really take care that if we are on a device, and this goes for if you're still working or if you're retired. My dad and stepmom are retired, but they're constantly on their devices. I was saying, lift your device so it's at eye level. Why is everyone like rounding over to look at their phone or their laptop or their iPad? Even listening to this conversation, you could be slouched somewhere, or you could decide, I'm going to listen and I'm also going to sit with a tall spine. And this could be almost like a listening meditation, or it could be a walking meditation, listening while on a nature walk, and just having intentionality of how is it that we're taking anything in, whether we're listening to something or we're in the stillness or we're in a physical practice of some kind. I think we've become so uncomfortable in the sort of what you'd call emptiness, right? If you're at a coffee date with a friend and they get up to go to the washroom, more often than not, people reach for their phone. And then it's this down gaze. And then now all of a sudden you've closed yourself from the present moment. Sure, if you're needing to tend to kids, or if you're an on-call, doctor or nurse and you need to be available, sure. And also there are ways that you can be tapped in without reaching for that on default. And I think that's the conversation we keep circling. It's like, what are we doing by default because we're in a moment of possible discomfort, versus just like sitting with it and actually realizing, okay, instead of doing this sort of down, moving the physicality in, what if I look out and I'm looking at nature, or maybe I want to make eye contact with a stranger and just share a smile. It doesn't have to be one thing or the other, but it's just letting there be an opportunity for a different way of being that actually feels more receptive. And when we all show up in that space, that has such a really beautiful ripple effect. And you realize once people are awake to that and you make eye contact and there's this knowing between you, like you're in on it, like, oh, actually, this is the connection. This is that moment of us being in the circle in the storytelling. So I think that's so powerful. Oftentimes I go to the dog park and people are on their phones checked out, and I don't even bring my phone in there. I leave it in the car. And so oftentimes it's so interesting. I'll try to say hello to people and they're just checked out. And it's, I don't know, it feels sad to me because I feel like here we are, like we're all here because we love our dogs, right? And why are you feeling like you have to distract with something else? Or if you're doing something that's so important, why did you decide to do that here? It just feels so counterintuitive to me. So I think more and more, maybe what's coming through as I'm talking through this is these times where we have an intentionality of being present. And that really connects to being intentional about how we are with our physical body, because it really directly correlates to the quality of our thoughts.
That was fascinating. And as you were explaining that, I'm trying to think how I would sit if I was wearing an evening gown. Like, oh, I would sit totally differently, not just here in my chair all comfortable. I would like sit up and be tall and think about not wrinkling all of the fabric and things like that. It's actually fascinating when you explain that and how that impacts. Immediately, I felt, I want to say, more empowered. I felt actually a little bit more excited because it meant that I am out there looking nice, dressed up. So Yeah, it made an immediate change in just even my own thoughts that were rolling along. So, wow. Yeah, this is amazing. And of course, our posture signaling through our fascia, our tissues, constantly signaling back to our brain what's actually going on in our body. So there being that constant communication, and we are having that choice of impacting it either positively or negatively at any given time. So I find these conversations absolutely inspirational, because at the same time as we're becoming aware of all of this, it opens up a lot of these choices that we actually have and how we want to be present, or in how we want to affect our own state during the day. It does open up a lot of possibilities for us to be a complete part of ourselves in that present moment. So, yeah, thank you for sharing all of that. I feel this was so inspirational into our own possibilities and really reconnecting with ourselves and with those amazing humans around us, even strangers. Giving a quick smile to somebody can really impact someone's day, even a small gesture like that. So, yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. It's so important, I think, because it takes the wall down of needing to almost have a certain way of being to protect. There's so much in the ether right now on identity and every facet and aspect of it. And they're depending on what culture you're from or what gender you are, how you identify, all of these things, we tend to be on the scale of more reserved, like not wanting to share too much, not wanting to be too vulnerable. But in fact, every time that I've wanted to close my heart, feeling like so much grief and hurt and anger, different life circumstances just feel like this is too hard, I've really taken a moment to think, okay, if I just retreated and didn't engage and didn't let anyone in, what kind of life is that? Am I in isolation? Am I just in this self-made cocoon? Which I do think for a time it does have a purpose. Sometimes we go through things and we want to have that solitude. But there's almost this like invisible moment, and I think a lot of people relate to this, where the solitude shifts into loneliness. And it's so universal. I hear this so often where people feel like, well, I don't want to burden anyone, or I don't want to bring anyone down, or I don't want anyone to think that I'm struggling or that I'm not doing well, or these things. And oftentimes, actually, what happens is allowing that vulnerability to show, it actually brings us closer to one another. And when I lost my dog a year ago, it wrecked me so hard. I was just out of my mind. I felt like my bones were going to weep until I couldn't stop. That kind of sadness that just feels like if you start crying, you'll never be able to be on the other side of it. That might be your new reality. And I recently was talking to a client, and her dog is getting older, and she shared with me last week, she's like, sometimes I rehearse him leaving, and she says, I know I can get through it because I watched you go through it. So I think that's so impactful, right? When we can really, because there's so much in social media, like, I just want to be seen. I want to be heard. I want to be celebrated, right? I want to be enough or worthy, right? But then there's this duality of human existence of like, but I don't want everyone to see like all of me. Some of it is maybe messy, or there's parts that feel faulty or not so polished. But those are the parts that we love each other more for. And sometimes we need to experience all the emotions so that we know how to move through it. And then we realize, oh, actually, this is a unifying piece, because we all experience all the emotions to different degrees. And when we can share in that experience, then we can actually be there for one another so that we don't have to hold it alone.
Yeah, and that is so beautifully said. And I'm so sorry about your dog. And
Thanks.
I can relate in the sense that our cat passed away 2 years ago, and I still feel a lot of those emotions, right? So I do feel when we share those things, it does create sort of an instant, authentic connection as we are sharing in these moments that really emotionally affected us as human beings, right? That made an impact in our lives and left a lasting change. Usually it does leave a change in us in some way when we go through these experiences. And that is an instant piece that we can connect on as humans, right? So yeah, absolutely beautifully said. And I'm guessing that a lot of our listeners can connect with that as well, having had a loss or someone or a fur baby and they lost. Yeah. So thanks for sharing that. And I want to connect a little bit before we wrap up with how our listeners can get in touch with all of the things that you shared with us, how they can connect with some of the things you mentioned. Do you have resources available, programs or services? What's available for our listeners to tune into when they're finished listening to this episode?
Yeah, thank you for that. And thank you so much for this opportunity. It's been such a heartwarming conversation, and I would love to connect. You can learn more about my offerings on my website, yogawithveronique.com. One of the parts that came through during COVID was really wanting us to connect, even though. And I feel like the even though it's applicable in so many different contexts, right? It's like, let's connect even though we're suffering. Let's connect even though we're traveling. Let's connect even though it feels like I can't leave the house, or maybe I'm in a really busy season at work. However it's looking for you. I created a book and it's an interactive book. It's called Shine On and Off the Mat. It's stories. So it's the connection of honoring my grandfather, my original storyteller. And then it's bringing into this interactive piece. So there's videos, there's a 20-minute guided meditation, movement practice, meaning it's a vinyasa style yoga. So like breath with movement, and then a yin stretch practice. So you're laying down and it's very gentle. You definitely seek to feel the stretch, and also you're comfortable with pillows and different support. And there's a theme for each series. So each of these are 20-minute practices. So if you wanted to go through all three, you'd have a wonderful 60-minute practice. Or if you only had the 20 minutes, you do it for the time that you have. And the invitation is to have the mind meal or the theme with you throughout your days. So oftentimes we don't realize we actually have the repeating thoughts that continue in our mind. And so what's so helpful about having a theme as an anchor is you can have that be almost a lens that you're passing the other thoughts through. So very aptly, the first theme in the book is let go, because we can always be practicing that. We certainly were practicing that March 17th of 2020. We're definitely practicing that now. We'll probably continually be practicing letting go. If that feels like a good anchor for you, I'd love for you to explore the book. There's also a membership that has everything put together: the stories, the practices, the music playlist, the journal prompts, and then this ability for us to connect. So for example, I might say, Petra, do you want to do this meditation together tomorrow? And we just negotiate the time zones. We get on a call. It could be video or phone. And then we could have a conversation of, how are you practicing letting go today? And then we might be shy to share that. But then in the vulnerability, we realize, oh, I'm also practicing that in a different way, right? Like we have our individual experience, and yet we bond in our collective, almost mirroring of one another that happens in different ways. And so there's a 7-day free trial, no commitment. You can go in and explore, see what resonates. You want to invite a friend to join. It's such a great way for that answer to the loneliness and the sedentary epidemic, where we can connect in community. And then you have stories that you can share with one another, and you create your little circles around the world. And if a retreat feels interesting, I have a retreat in Italy at the end of October. It's October 24th to the 31st. It's in this really beautiful retreat center on the East Coast. It's regarded as the new Tuscany. At the time of recording, there are a few spots left. So if you are interested in that, you're welcome to reach out. Would love to be on retreat together. It's one of my greatest joys is to be on retreat. It doesn't have to be, I know sometimes there's a misconception of like, oh, I don't know if my practice is advanced enough, or I haven't been practicing that long. We've had people that have very established, long-lived practices to people come and this is their first entry into it. And so I always feel like if it aligns, show up and be in that space of receptivity. And maybe this is the moment to shift out of default of, oh, I can't do that because of this and this. Is like, but what if you could? And we just let ourselves have the possibility that if I said yes, like what would I open myself up to? So I love that for retreat, because we have people come year after year and they realize, like everything shifts the more that we say yes to the things that are in alignment. And so I welcome that. I'm on Instagram also at Veronique Ory. If you want to be in conversation, I think more and more, let's be in conversation. It's so wonderful to listen to a conversation. And then I think there's this next layer of sharing it, whether you share this episode with someone that you think would resonate with it, or if you feel inspired to share your reflections with Petra or with me, I would love to hear what resonates, what questions you have, so that we can continue that conversation.
Amazing. And thank you for sharing all of those things. And we, of course, will do our part and link to all of that in the show notes for our listeners so they know where to find you, how to connect with you. Definitely take advantage of the book and check that out for yourselves, because I feel there are many little entry points and we just need to find the thing that really works for us and aligns, as Veronique said, with what works for ourselves and our journeys. And hey, if you feel like coming to Italy, you'll be close to me. So that sounds like a lot of fun. So if you're ready for a little break in the fall time, that would be amazing to come on a yoga retreat. So we'll link to all of that for you in the show notes. Have a look there on how you can connect. And thanks, Veronique, for being here today and sharing all of this, sharing a bit of your journey with our listeners as well. And just this really important piece of coming back to ourselves, coming out of this autopilot living, reconnecting, and really also bringing our mind and body back into this conversation. I truly appreciate you being here today. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you so much.
And thanks everyone for tuning in today, for listening to our conversation, and hopefully for joining into the conversation too. Reach out to us here at the podcast or to Veronique. We'd love to hear from you. And until we hear each other again, take care of yourselves and be well. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen in. If you enjoy the Jōrni Podcast, please support us by subscribing, sharing on social media, and leaving us a review. We appreciate you. And you can find more of The Jōrni on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and our website, thejorni.com. Sending you love and courage, and see you next time.